On the 8th of May, 1945, Germany officially capitulated. The war in Europe had come to an end. Across the continent, thousands of Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters remained scattered on airfields stretching from Norway to Austria. This aircraft held a remarkable distinction. More than 33,000 had been produced, making it the most manufactured fighter plane in aviation history. Throughout the conflict, it served as the principal fighter of the Luftwaffe. From 1939 until 1945, Allied pilots encountered it repeatedly in combat. It was fast, dangerous, and widely respected. Yet when the war ended and the Third Reich vanished, a new question emerged. What would become of these countless fighters? Would they be dismantled, destroyed, or left to decay? The reality proved far more unusual. The Bf 109's story did not end with Germany's surrender. In fact, a new chapter was just beginning. Some aircraft would enter service with entirely different countries. Others would eventually fight against nations that had once been their partners. One version would become the first fighter aircraft used by Israel. Another would appear in Hollywood productions, portraying German attackers over Britain. A small number would remain airworthy well into the 21st century, nearly 80 years after their construction. This is the account of what happened to the Messerschmitt Bf 109 after the Second World War. It is the story of how a fighter associated with Hitler's Germany became a key asset for foreign air forces, how former enemies became operators, and how the most produced fighter aircraft ever built refused to fade away. The story begins in May 1945. As Germany collapsed, Allied armies moved rapidly through the country. They discovered Bf 109s almost everywhere. Operational airfields contained them. Factories held them. Some were concealed inside forests. Others were found in underground installations. A number of aircraft remained fully operational, complete with fuel and weapons, capable of taking off immediately. Others had suffered damage, been stripped for spare parts, or deliberately burned by withdrawing German troops. Many simply sat abandoned where they had last been parked. Ground personnel had fled. Pilots had vanished. The fighters remained behind. The Allies acted quickly to secure these aircraft. American forces launched Operation Lusty, short for Luftwaffe Secret Technology. Teams spread throughout Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia, searching for advanced German aviation technology. By 1945 standards, the Bf 109 was no longer considered especially advanced. Its origins reached back to 1935. Newer Allied fighters had surpassed it. Nevertheless, the aircraft existed in enormous numbers, and some versions still attracted considerable attention. The Bf 109G, known as the Gustav, represented the most common model. More than 24,000 examples had been built. For many people, this variant defines the image of the Bf 109. The Bf 109K, called the Kurfürst, represented the final major wartime version. It carried a stronger engine and heavier weaponry. Only around 700 were completed before Germany surrendered. American intelligence teams photographed the aircraft, recorded their locations, and carefully documented their condition. British operations surgeon personnel conducted similar work. They interviewed surviving pilots and engineers while collecting technical documents and maintenance manuals. Soviet trophy brigades focused on capturing entire factories, particularly those located in eastern Germany and Czechoslovakia. A race had begun. Every Allied nation wanted access to German aviation technology. Even equipment considered outdated by Allied standards might still offer valuable insights unavailable elsewhere. By June 1945, the Allied Control Council issued a clear directive. Germany would surrender all military aircraft. Combat aviation would no longer be permitted. Destruction began almost immediately. Throughout Germany, Bf 109s were gathered into long rows on airfields. Hundreds stood wingtip to wingtip awaiting their fate. Then the elimination process started. Bulldozers crushed them. Explosive charges shattered them. Some were burned where they stood. Well, the scale was enormous. At Flensburg in northern Germany, more than 300 Bf 109s were destroyed within a single week. Near Munich, at Neuburg, Allied forces located over 200 fighters. Most were dismantled on site. The material itself remained valuable. Europe faced a massive rebuilding effort. Aluminum and steel recovered from German aircraft were redirected into civilian industries and manufacturing projects. Not every Bf 109 met an immediate end. The United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union each selected examples for evaluation and testing. The United States Army Air Forces transported several Bf 109G aircraft to Wright Field in Ohio. Engineers compared them against American fighters, examining the design and assessing both advantages and shortcomings. Their conclusion was straightforward. The Bf 109 remained a capable fighter, but it was inferior to late-war American aircraft such as the P-51 Mustang. British test pilots flew captured Bf 109s at RAF Farnborough. They evaluated handling qualities and compared performance against Spitfires and Tempests. The verdict echoed the American assessment. The aircraft was effective, but no longer exceptional. Its age was becoming evident. The Soviets showed greater interest. They acquired hundreds of Bf-109s in operational condition. Extensive testing followed. Pilots used them to practice combat tactics against German fighters. Engineers examined manufacturing techniques and incorporated selected design concepts into Soviet projects. By 1947, most captured Bf-109s had been scrapped. Testing programs had concluded. The information had been collected. The aircraft were now considered obsolete. Yet thousands of additional Bf-109s existed beyond Germany's borders. Several countries had manufactured the aircraft under German license during the war, and those nations faced a different situation entirely. Spain had produced the fighter as the Hispano Aviación HA-1109 using German plans, and, at first, German engines. Factories in Prague had manufactured Bf-109G components and spare parts. Romania had assembled aircraft from kits supplied by Germany. When the war ended, these countries still possessed production facilities, tooling, spare components, and trained personnel. They retained everything necessary to continue building the fighter. What they required was a reason. Czechoslovakia found one first. In 1945, the newly liberated government urgently needed an air force. 6 years of occupation had eliminated the country's pre-war aviation force. Aircraft had either been destroyed or absorbed into German service. Fortunately, the Avia factory in Prague remained intact. Inside were Bf-109G airframes, engine parts, tools, production equipment, and technical documentation. The decision was simple. Production would continue. Between 1945 and 1948, Avia completed Bf-109G-14 aircraft using existing German components and records. The new designation became the Avia S-99. In practice, it was almost identical to the German fighter. It used the same Daimler-Benz DB605 engine. Armament remained unchanged. Performance was essentially the same. The Czechoslovak Air Force organized fighter units around these aircraft. Former Luftwaffe machines now flew beneath a different national flag. However, a major problem soon appeared. Supplies of DB605 engines were limited. Many had been destroyed during the war, and replacement parts were difficult to obtain. A substitute became necessary. The chosen replacement was the Junkers Jumo 211F, an engine originally intended for bombers. It weighed more than the DB605 and delivered less performance at higher altitudes, but it was available. The result proved disastrous. The Jumo 211F had been designed for an entirely different role. Weight distribution differed. Torque characteristics differed. Cooling requirements differed. Installing it inside a Bf-109 airframe created severe maintenance difficulties and introduced dangerous handling characteristics. The new aircraft became known as the Avia S-199. It earned a reputation as one of the worst fighters ever produced. The aircraft was extremely nose-heavy. Takeoffs became hazardous because of the engine's weight. Strong torque during acceleration caused violent directional swings. Inexperienced pilots crashed frequently. Weapon systems created additional problems. Guns jammed often. Synchronization mechanisms failed repeatedly. Pilots despised the aircraft. They nicknamed it Mezek, meaning the mule, because it constantly seemed determined to kill its pilot. Despite these shortcomings, Czechoslovakia still manufactured 550 examples. The reason was simple. Fighters were needed, and this was the aircraft they could produce. The S-199 served with the Czechoslovak Air Force from 1947 until 1952. It remained in service long enough to train an entire generation of pilots, yet not so long that training accidents claimed even more lives. Then, during 1948, an unexpected opportunity appeared. Israel urgently needed fighter aircraft. The newly proclaimed state was already at war. 5 Arab nations had launched invasions. The Israeli Air Force possessed almost no combat aircraft. The need was immediate and critical. Purchasing fighters from the United States was impossible because Washington had imposed an arms embargo on the region. Britain would not sell them. France showed hesitation. Czechoslovakia, however, agreed. In May 1948, a deal was reached. Czechoslovakia would provide 25 S-199 fighters to Israel. Each aircraft cost $180,000. Ammunition and spare parts were included. The Israelis had little understanding of the aircraft they were purchasing. They only knew they were acquiring something called a Messerschmitt, a name associated with wartime success. The first S-199 fighters reached Israel by sea on the 20th of May, 1948. They arrived packed in crates and required assembly. Israeli mechanics worked continuously. By the 29th of May, 1948, the first aircraft was ready for flight, and when Israeli pilots finally flew it, the reaction was immediate. One pilot completed his first flight and reported that the machine seemed determined to kill him. Its heavy nose complicated landings. Takeoffs demanded constant correction because of powerful torque effects. The weapons frequently jammed at critical moments, but despite every flaw, it was the fighter they had. On the 3rd of June, 1948, Israeli S-199 fighters carried out their first combat operation. Their target was an Egyptian force moving toward Tel Aviv. The outcome was mixed. In the ground attack role, the aircraft performed reasonably well. Air combat was another matter entirely. Flying the S-199 against enemy aircraft was extremely risky. The first aerial victory arrived on the 8th of June, 1948. Israeli pilot Modi Alon successfully shot down 2 Egyptian C-47 transport aircraft. Yet losses continued to increase. Enemy action was not the primary cause. Accidents were. Pilots crashed during takeoff. Others wrecked their aircraft while landing. Some lost control during training missions. Out of the 25 S-199 fighters delivered to Israel, 6 were destroyed in landing accidents during the first 2 months alone. Despite these difficulties, the aircraft remained in service throughout 1948 and into 1949. They became Israel's first fighter force, helping keep the young air arm operational during its most critical period. Toward the end of 1949, more capable aircraft began arriving. Spitfires came from Czechoslovakia. P-51 Mustangs were obtained through sources in Latin America. The S-199 was soon withdrawn from service after slightly more than a year of use. Most were scrapped. A small number survived. One example remains on display at the Israeli Air Force Museum today. The historical irony was remarkable. The Messerschmitt Bf-109, originally created to serve Nazi Germany, became the first fighter aircraft operated by the Jewish state. Israel, however, was not the only surprising post-war user of the Bf-109. Spain provides another example. Spanish factories had been building Bf-109s under license since 1942. During the war, they relied on German Daimler-Benz engines. After Germany's defeat, those engines could no longer be supplied. Spain encountered the same challenge faced by Czechoslovakia. Their answer was very different. Instead of searching for another German power plant, they selected the Rolls-Royce Merlin. It was the same engine that powered the Spitfire, the aircraft most closely associated with opposing the Bf-109 during the war. The new aircraft received the designation Hispano Aviación HA-1112. Pilots nicknamed it Buchon, meaning powder pigeon, because of its enlarged nose profile. The first Buchon took flight in 1951. Manufacturing continued until 1958. Spain completed approximately 200 HA-1112 aircraft. These fighters equipped Spanish Air Force squadrons throughout the 1950s and remained in service into the 1960s. The Merlin engine actually offered advantages. It proved more dependable than the DB-605. Performance improved at certain altitudes and maintenance became easier. Even so, the aircraft looked unusual. The Merlin engine was larger than the Daimler-Benz unit. The engine cowling changed shape. The silhouette no longer matched the original German fighter. The result appeared almost like a hybrid machine, a Messerschmitt airframe powered by a British engine. The HA-1112 continued serving with the Spanish Air Force until 1965, 2 decades after the end of World War II. Its final operational mission took place on the 27th of December, 1965. The pilot was Mariano Quadra Medina. Afterward, the Buchon fleet was retired. Many aircraft were dismantled. Others survived in storage, largely forgotten as they sat in Spanish warehouses collecting dust. Then, in 1968, they received an unexpected final assignment. Hollywood needed airplanes. During 1968, United Artists was producing The Battle of Britain, a major motion picture centered on the air campaign of 1940. The production required large numbers of aircraft. Spitfires were needed, Hurricanes were needed, German fighters were needed as well. A major obstacle quickly appeared. Almost no genuine German fighters remained airworthy. Most Luftwaffe aircraft had been destroyed after the war. Someone remembered the stored Spanish Buchons. Many of them still had the potential to fly. The film company purchased 27 HA-1112s from Spain and transported them to England. Months were spent restoring them to flying condition. The aircraft were modified to resemble wartime Bf-109s more closely. Engine cowlings were reshaped, German markings were added. When they flew, however, the sound revealed their true identity. Instead of the familiar Daimler-Benz engine note, they produced the unmistakable growl of the Merlin. On camera, that difference mattered little. The 1969 film The Battle of Britain featured these Spanish-built fighters with British engines portraying German aircraft attacking England. They fought Spitfires powered by the very same type of engine. Once filming ended, most of the Buchons entered private ownership. Collectors acquired them, and they became the foundation of the growing warbird community's Bf-109 fleet. Today, many aircraft presented as flying Bf-109s are actually Spanish-built HA-1112 Buchons equipped with Merlin engines. When spectators watch a Bf-109 at an air show, there is a significant chance they are seeing a Spanish post-war version representing a German wartime fighter. Spain and Czechoslovakia were not alone in continuing Bf-109 operations after the war. Several other nations also retained the type. Switzerland operated Bf-109s purchased from Germany between 1939 and 1940. These fighters remained in service until 1949, almost 10 years after the conflict ended. The Swiss also produced their own aircraft, the EKW C-3603. Its design showed strong influence from the Bf-109. That aircraft remained operational until 1952. Finland had received Bf-109G fighters from Germany during the war. After the conflict, they continued flying them. Finland had not technically been at war with the Western Allies. Its conflict had been with the Soviet Union. As a result, there was no obligation to destroy the aircraft. Finnish Bf-109s remained in service until 1954. Some became training aircraft. Others were used as target tugs. The final Finnish Bf-109 flight occurred in March 1954, almost 9 years after VE Day. Romania had flown Bf-109s while allied with Germany during the war. After changing sides in 1944, Romanian forces continued using the aircraft against Germany itself. Following the war, Romania kept its Bf-109 fleet in service until 1950, when Soviet aircraft arrived as replacements. Bulgaria also received Bf-109s from Germany during the conflict, and continued operating them until 1950. Yugoslavia captured numerous examples abandoned by retreating German and Croatian forces. Those aircraft remained active until 1952. By the middle of the 1950s, most countries had retired the Bf-109. Jet aircraft and more advanced piston engine fighters had taken its place. But another chapter was beginning. As operational service ended, interest in restoration and preservation started to grow. During the 1960s and 1970s, aviation enthusiasts began searching for surviving Bf-109s. They discovered them in unexpected locations. Some were crash sites deep inside Russian forests. Others sat preserved in museums. Some remained hidden in forgotten storage facilities. Several rested beneath lakes. Others lay buried in fields. Every discovery was carefully recorded. Recovered aircraft were excavated and transported to restoration workshops where years of work slowly returned them to life. The process was demanding. Original components were difficult to locate. Technical records were often incomplete. Experienced specialists were rare. Certain restoration projects required decades to finish. The first restored Bf-109 returned to the sky during the 1970s. It was a G model recovered from Russia. More aircraft followed. Museums launched major restoration programs. Private collectors invested millions. By the 1990s, several Bf-109s once again appeared at air shows, historical events, and film productions. Today, approximately 8 to 10 airworthy Bf-109s exist around the world. Some are original German-built aircraft restored with extraordinary care. Others are Spanish Buchons modified to resemble wartime German fighters. A few are composite machines assembled from the remains of multiple wrecks. Components gathered from sites across Europe were combined into complete aircraft. Among the most authentic examples is the Bf-109G10, operated by the Flying Heritage and Combat Armor Museum in Washington State. It has been restored to original configuration and uses a Daimler-Benz DB605 engine. Other flying examples rely on replacement power plants. Some use Merlin engines taken from Buchon aircraft. A few employ modern engines concealed beneath period-correct external appearances. This remains a subject of debate among aviation purists. Questions arise about whether an aircraft can truly be called a Bf-109 if it lacks its original engine or major components. For most observers, the answer matters less than the experience. Watching a Bf-109 fly, hearing its engine, and seeing it in motion provides a direct connection to history. There is also another category of surviving aircraft. These are the machines preserved permanently in museums. Today, roughly 60 to 70 Bf-109s exist in museum collections worldwide. The Smithsonian preserves a Bf-109G6 captured in North Africa and displayed at the National Air and Space Museum. The Imperial War Museum in London houses a Bf-109E that was shot down during the Battle of Britain and recovered from the English Channel in 1980. The Deutsches Museum in Munich possesses several versions, including an early Bf-109B. The RAF Museum at Hendon displays a Bf-109G as part of its extensive collection of German aircraft. The Australian War Memorial maintains a Bf-109G captured in North Africa during 1942. Museums in Russia, Poland, France, Finland, Israel, and the United States also preserve examples. Every aircraft carries its own history. Each tells where it was constructed, who operated it. The discoveries did not stop. On the English Channel seabed in 2003, divers located a Bf-109E. Cold water had preserved the aircraft remarkably well. Another find came in 2012. A Bf-109G was lifted from a lake in Russia. The aircraft was almost intact. Ammunition remained aboard. Fuel was still present as well. In 2018, investigators uncovered another Bf-109 buried beneath a field in France. It had crashed during 1944. Every new recovery attracts attention throughout the aviation community. Questions immediately follow. Now, will the aircraft be restored? Can it fly again? Or will it become a museum exhibit? The financial reality is severe. Restoring a Bf-109 to flying condition requires between $2 million and $4 million. Rare versions may demand even higher costs. A non-flying museum restoration is far less expensive, generally between $500,000 and $1 million. As a result, most newly discovered Bf-109s eventually enter museum collections. The expense of returning them to flight is simply too great. Occasionally, circumstances are different. A wealthy collector may provide funding. A museum may possess the necessary resources. A restoration team may commit years of effort. When those elements come together, another Bf-109 returns to the sky. To understand why these surviving aircraft matter, it is important to look at the significance of the design itself. The Bf-109 was created in 1934 by Willy Messerschmitt. Its maiden flight took place in September 1935. At the time, the aircraft represented a major technological step forward. It featured all-metal construction. The cockpit was enclosed. Landing gear retracted into the airframe. It used a low-wing monoplane layout. Today, those features are ordinary. In 1935, they were at the forefront of aviation design. The Bf-109 entered Luftwaffe service in 1937. It saw action during the Spanish Civil War and demonstrated superiority over much of its opposition. When World War II began in 1939, the aircraft had already become the Luftwaffe's principal fighter. It fought across every major theater: Poland, France, Britain, North Africa, the Soviet Union, the Mediterranean. Many of Germany's highest-scoring fighter pilots achieved their records in this aircraft. Erich Hartmann accumulated 352 victories while flying the Bf-109. Gerhard Barkhorn achieved 301. Günther Rahl recorded 275. Among the 100 highest-scoring fighter aces in history, the majority were German pilots, and most flew Bf-109s. The aircraft continued evolving throughout the war. The Bf-109E, known as the Emile, fought during the Battle of Britain. The Bf-109F, called the Friedrich, was considered by many pilots to be the finest version. It combined strong performance with excellent balance. The Bf-109G, the Gustav, became the most heavily produced model. More than 24,000 were manufactured. From 1942 until 1945, it served as the Luftwaffe's primary workhorse. The Bf-109K, the Kurfürst, represented the final major development. It was the most heavily armed and most powerful version. Only 700 were completed before the war ended. By 1945, newer Allied fighters had surpassed the Bf-109 in several areas: the P-51 Mustang, the P-47 Thunderbolt, the Hawker Tempest, the Yakovlev Yak-3. Even so, a skilled pilot could still make the aircraft a formidable opponent. Total production reached 33,984 aircraft. No other fighter in history exceeded that figure. For comparison, 20,351 Spitfires were built, 15,875 P-51 Mustangs were produced, 15,636 P-47 Thunderbolts left the factory, 20,051 FW-190 aircraft were completed. The Bf-109 surpassed all of them in production numbers. In an unusual way, it also remained in service longer than many of its contemporaries. The final operational military flight of a Bf-109 derivative, the Spanish HA-1112, occurred in 1965. The last operational military flight by a Spitfire took place in 1961. The final operational military use of the P-51 Mustang came in 1984 with service in the Dominican Republic, although that situation was unusual. Looking strictly at the original design and mission, the Bf-109 remained active longer than nearly every other fighter of World War II. Its operational story stretched from 1935 to 1965. That represents 20 years between first flight and final operational sortie. For any aircraft design, that is an extraordinary lifespan. Today, the legacy of the Bf-109 remains complicated. For aviation enthusiasts, it stands as a landmark achievement in aircraft engineering and design. For historians, it is an essential part of understanding the air war of World War II. Studying the Bf-109 helps explain the conflict fought in the skies. In Germany, the subject is more complex. The aircraft reflects both engineering achievement and the difficult legacy of the Third Reich. Modern Germany does not celebrate Luftwaffe aircraft in the same manner that Britain honors the Spitfire or the United States honors the Mustang. There are no national monuments dedicated to Bf 109 pilots. There are no major national museums devoted solely to the Luftwaffe. The aircraft remains present in museums, but the interpretation differs. The focus is less celebratory and more reflective. For collectors and restoration specialists, the Bf 109 presents another challenge. How can history be preserved without endorsing the causes associated with it? Most museums and restorers approach the aircraft through documentation, education, and technical preservation. Displays explain the aircraft's role, its pilots, and the cause for which it fought. The goal is not praise. The goal is not condemnation. The goal is historical record. At the same time, many people appreciate the machine itself. Separate from politics, the aircraft represented an efficient, innovative, and highly effective design. It is possible to admire the engineering while rejecting the purposes it served. That philosophy guides most museums and collectors. Flying Bf 109s regularly appear at air shows. Many performances pair them with Allied aircraft in carefully choreographed mock dogfights. Watching a Bf 109 and a Spitfire maneuver against one another gives audiences a glimpse into the past. These are not replicas operated by actors. They are the actual aircraft types. The sounds are real. The maneuvers are real. The experience offers a form of living history. It is perhaps the closest modern audiences can come to understanding what pilots experienced 80 years ago. The spectators who gather are diverse. Some are veterans who once fought against Bf 109s. Others are their children and grandchildren. Many are young aviation enthusiasts. Some attend to remember. Others attend to learn. Some simply want to watch extraordinary aircraft in flight. All of those motivations have their place. So what became of the Messerschmitt Bf 109 after World War II? Most examples were destroyed. Many were scrapped. Others were melted down and transformed into materials for civilian industry. Some were tested and evaluated before being discarded once their intelligence value disappeared. Others continued production under foreign licenses and remained in service for years after the war. A number fought in conflicts no one could have predicted. Israel's War of Independence, Arab-Israeli wars, internal security operations. Several served with air forces that had not fought in World War II at all. Spain, Switzerland, Finland, Yugoslavia. Many crashed. Many were abandoned. Many disappeared into forests, fields, lakes, and forgotten storage sites. A very small number survived. They were preserved, restored, and maintained as historical artifacts. Out of 33,984 aircraft produced, roughly 70 survive in museums today. Perhaps 10 remain capable of flight. That equals a survival rate of approximately 0.2%. 0.2%. For every 500 Bf 109s constructed, only one survives today. Yet those survivors carry the memory of all the others. The aircraft lost in combat, the aircraft destroyed after the war, the aircraft that simply aged, wore out, and vanished. When a Bf 109 rises into the air at an air show, it represents more than a single machine. It stands for the other 33,000 aircraft. It reflects the pilots who flew them, the ground crews who maintained them, the engineers who designed them, the workers who assembled them. It represents a technology, an era, and a conflict that helped shape the modern world. It also reminds us that weapons often outlive the wars for which they were created. Preserved history remains available for study and understanding. Even the darkest chapters deserve to be documented, examined, and remembered. The post-war story of the Bf 109 is ultimately a story of transformation. A weapon became an artifact. A tool of combat became an instrument of education. It became part of unexpected stories, serving Israel, appearing in British films, training Spanish pilots, performing before American airshow audiences. It is also a story of preservation. Dedicated enthusiasts invested decades of effort and vast sums of money to keep these aircraft alive. It became the backbone of the Luftwaffe. It became the most produced fighter aircraft ever built.